This video contains images and content generated or assisted by artificial intelligence.
The cabin fell silent the moment the little girl whispered, "Sir." "That's my seat." The grown man in 3A didn't flinch. He smirked, spreading himself deeper into the stolen first-class chair, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Passengers watched, stunned, as he ordered her to go sit in the back like she was invisible. But what he didn't know, what only the reader knows, is that this wasn't just any child. This was the daughter of a billionaire whose influence could ground an aircraft with a single phone call. And the man who thought he owned seat 3A was about to lose far more than a chair. A grown man stole a 10-year-old billionaire's daughter's first-class seat. But what happened next left the entire plane shocked and grounded. The automatic doors slid open at Dallas Love Field Airport, and the sound of rolling suitcases filled the air. 10-year-old Imani Barrett walked beside her nanny, Lorraine Parker, her tiny hands gripping a shiny pink backpack. For most kids, flying was an adventure in itself for Imani. This was special. It was the first time she was flying first class, and she had been talking about it non-stop since they left the house. Her hair was braided neatly with small beads clicking together. When she turned her head, she wore a simple lavender hoodie with the word "genius" stitched across the front, a gift from her father after she aced a math competition. There was nothing pretentious about her. She wasn't the type to brag about her family's wealth, though everyone around her seemed to know the Barrett name. Lorraine adjusted her tote bag on her shoulder and bent down to whisper Imani, "You remember your seat number?" Imani nodded quickly, proud that she'd memorized it. "A window seat," she announced with a smile, her voice bouncing with excitement. Other passengers glanced at them as they joined the boarding line. Some smiled politely, others barely noticed, eyes glued to their phones. Lorraine checked her watch. Everything seemed smooth. She wanted this flight to go without any trouble. Imani's father, one of the most recognized self-made billionaires in Texas, trusted her to keep his daughter safe. And she didn't take that lightly when they finally reached the jet bridge. Imani skipped a little, tugging Lorraine's hand. The air grew cooler as they stepped onto the plane. The cabin smelled faintly of leather seats and the faint, sterile scent of cleaning spray. First class wasn't packed yet, so it felt calm, soft lighting, wide seats. People quietly settling in. Imani stopped for a moment, soaking it all in. She whispered, "It's like the pictures, but better." Lorraine chuckled, guiding her forward. "Okay, 3A, let's get you settled." The little girl LED, the way scanning the row. Numbers, her backpack bouncing. She spotted row 3 and lit up, but her smile faltered when she saw something she didn't expect. Seat 3A wasn't empty. A heavy-set man, maybe in his mid-50s, sat there with his arms crossed. He had pale skin that flushed easily, short, thinning hair, and a round face set in a smug expression. His black polo shirt stretched tight across his stomach, and a half-open newspaper rested on his lap. He didn't look up as Imani paused in front of him. Instead, he shifted slightly, as if to make himself more comfortable, claiming space that wasn't his. Imani looked at Lorraine, then back at the man. Her voice came out soft but clear. "Excuse me, sir. That's my seat, 3A. She held up her boarding pass with pride, pointing at the number. The man finally looked up, his pale blue eyes narrowing, his lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "I think you've made a mistake, little girl. This is my seat." Lorraine immediately stepped in. Her tone polite but firm, so she's correct. "This is her assigned seat. Here's her boarding pass." She extended the slip toward him. He didn't bother looking at it. Instead, he waved a dismissive hand. "I'm sure there's been a mix-up." Why don't you take her to the back? That's where kids usually sit, the words hung in the air like smoke. A couple of nearby passengers turned their heads. A young woman across the aisle glanced quickly, then looked down at her phone. A man 2 rows ahead pretended to adjust his headphones. Though his eyes darted to the scene in the reflection of the window, Imani stood still, clutching her pass. Her small face didn't twist into anger or tears. Instead, she stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the man who had just taken what was rightfully hers. There was something about her silence that made the situation sting more. She wasn't throwing a tantrum. She was simply standing there with dignity, as if silently saying, "I know what's mine." Lorraine's voice. "Hardened, says sir, she's assigned to 3A. Please check your ticket. We don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." The man leaned back in the seat, folding his arms tighter across his chest. "Listen, I paid for first class. I'm not giving up this seat for a child who probably doesn't even understand the difference. You can make her comfortable in coach. I'm not moving." The tension thickened. The flight attendant at the front of the cabin noticed, pausing mid-step. Passengers glanced, whispered, then quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to get involved, but everybody knew something wasn't right. But instead of breaking the silence, Imani straightened her shoulders. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She simply stood there, holding her boarding pass like a shield. Her eyes steady on the man who thought he could take what belonged to her. But this was only the beginning, and the cabin was about to feel a lot heavier than anyone expected. The aisle felt narrower than ever, as Lorraine tried to keep her cool. She'd been in uncomfortable travel situations before, but this one felt different. The man, Gerald Whitford, according to the boarding list tucked into his pocket, wasn't budging. His pale cheeks were red. Not from embarrassment, but from the arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable, Sir Lorraine said again, holding the boarding pass right in front of him. "This isn't a debate. The ticket clearly says 3A, you're in her seat." Gerald's jaw shifted as he chewed on his own defiance. "And I'm telling you, I'm staying right here. What's she going to do? Kick me out herself?" He chuckled a low, smug sound that made the nearby passengers sink further into their seats. Imani gripped her backpack, straps tighter. She didn't understand why a grown man would act this way in her young mind. Rules were simple. You buy a ticket, you sit in the seat that matches it. She tilted her head slightly and asked, "Why are you being mean?" "I am supposed to sit there for the first time." His smirk faltered, but only for a moment. Gerald shifted, the newspaper on his lap, snapping it open again, as though the conversation was beneath him. "Kids don't need first class. It's wasted on them." "She'll be fine in the back." Lorraine's patience thinned. "You don't get to decide that she belongs here." By now, more. Passengers were paying attention. A couple sitting diagonally behind leaned toward each other, whispering. A man in business attire pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll, but angled it just enough to record if things escalated. The flight attendant finally stepped forward. She was a tall woman with auburn hair pulled neatly into a bun, her name tag reading Kimberly. She forced a professional smile. "What seems to be the problem here?" Lorraine exhaled sharply, grateful for the backup. "The problem is that my ward's seat has been taken. She has 3A, but this gentleman refuses to move." Kimberly turned to Gerald, keeping her voice even. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" He rustled the newspaper, pretending to search his pocket, but didn't hand anything over. Instead, he leaned back in the seat like a king refusing to leave his throne. "You don't need to see it. I know where I'm supposed to be. I'm comfortable right here." Imani watched closely, her small chest rising and falling As she tried to keep calm, she glanced up at Lorraine, then at Kimberly, then back to Gerald. She wanted to believe that adults would solve this fairly. Kimberly hesitated. Her eyes darted between Gerald's flushed face and Lorraine's tightening jaw. "Sir, we need to verify your seat number." "Please." Gerald leaned forward, lowering his voice, but not his arrogance. "Look, I don't know how she afforded this ticket for that kid, but I paid good money to sit here. You're really going to throw me out for her." The words stabbed at Lorraine. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about the way he looked at Amani, as if she didn't belong. Lorraine's voice sharpened. "This isn't your choice to make. She has every right to sit here. Show your ticket, or get out of the way." The whispering around them grew. Louder, a man 2 rows back muttered, "Can you believe this?" While a woman in the aisle seat shook her head. Slowly, nobody intervened, but everyone watched. Amani took a small step forward, clutching her boarding pass in both hands. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I'm not moving. This is my seat. Please, just let me sit down." Something about her calmness made Gerald shift uncomfortably for the first time. He didn't expect resistance from a child. His mouth opened, but no words came out right away. He coughed, then muttered, "Kids these days think they own the world." Kimberly glanced toward the front of the cabin, signaling discreetly to another crew member. The situation was slipping beyond polite conversation. Lorraine noticed the signal and clenched her jaw. She didn't like how long this was dragging on. Passengers could feel the energy shift. A college student in a hoodie whispered. "Why don't they just move him already?" Another man muttered. "Because they're scared to cause a scene before takeoff." Lorraine lowered herself slightly to meet Amani's eye level. "You okay, sweetheart?" Amani nodded, though her grip on the backpack straps didn't loosen. She whispered, "Why won't he let me sit?" "It's my seat." Lorraine brushed a braid from Amani's cheek and gave her a reassuring smile. "Because sometimes people think rules don't apply to them, but we're not backing down." The flight attendant cleared her throat, trying one last time. "Mr. Whitford, I need to see your boarding pass right now." He sighed loudly, throwing his hands in the air as if he were the victim of harassment. Fine. Let me dig it out." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the stub. Kimberly took it, scanning quickly, her brows knitted together. Her voice dropped, but it was clear enough for those nearby to hear. "So your seat is 8C, not 3A." The whispers turned into a low ripple of gasps. Gerald's cheeks flushed deeper, but he wasn't ready to surrender. He leaned back in the seat again, folding his arms. "That's impossible. There must be a mistake in the system." "I'm not." Moving, the disbelief in the cabin thickened. Everyone knew the truth now. Everyone could see the pass in Kimberly's hand. But Gerald still clung to the seat, determined to prove that his comfort outweighed a little girl's right to sit where she belonged. But what nobody realized yet was that this was about to drag the entire flight into a standoff, far bigger than just one seat. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Kimberly, the flight attendant, still had Gerald's boarding stub in her hand, clearly showing his seat was in row 8. But the man wouldn't budge. He leaned back, arms crossed, chin tucked into his chest as if digging in for a fight. Lorraine's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd dealt with rude people before. But this was different. Her voice cut sharp through the tense silence. "The proof is right there. You're not supposed to be here now. Either you move, or we'll make sure someone moves you." Gerald snorted his belly, shaking under his stretched polo shirt. "You sound real tough, lady. But I'm not moving because some spoiled brat thinks she owns the place." First class is in a daycare. Amani's eyes flicked down for a second, then back up at him. She didn't shrink away. She stood in the aisle, still clutching her pass, still waiting for someone to make it right. Another flight attendant, a younger man named Derek, walked over after Kimberly's signal. He had a calm expression, but a firmness in his tone. "Sir, this flight can't leave until you're in your assigned seat. You're delaying everyone here." Gerald turned toward him, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I'm the problem, not the little princess here who wants to take over first class." He jabbed a thumb toward Amani, who didn't flinch. Lorraine stepped closer. Her patience gone. "How dare you talk to a child like that? You're embarrassing yourself." Gerald leaned forward, lowering his voice, so it came out more like a hiss. "Lady, you don't scare me. I've been flying longer than this kid's been alive. I'm not going anywhere." The murmurs around them grew louder. A woman in her 40s across the aisle finally spoke up. "Sir, you're in the wrong seat. We all saw the ticket. Just move." Another man chimed in from row 4. "Yeah, you're holding everybody up." Gerald turned on them too, snapping, "Mind your business. You don't know the whole story." Kimberly exchanged a look with Derek. She didn't want this to get worse, but it already had. Lorraine noticed the hesitation and called it out. "Why are you letting him do this? You see what's happening, but you're standing there, letting a 10-year-old get humiliated." The words struck deeper than anyone expected. A few passengers nodded. The tension was no longer just between Gerald and Imani. It was about whether the crew had the courage to handle it. Imani, still quiet, finally spoke again. "I don't want to fight. I just want to sit in my seat so we can go." Her voice was soft, but the honesty in it sliced through the chaos. Derek crouched slightly so his voice met her height. "You will sit here. Sweetheart, don't worry." He stood tall again, turning to Gerald. "Sir, last chance, get up." Gerald's face twisted into something ugly. He raised his voice, not quite yelling, but loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "This is ridiculous. She doesn't even belong here. You think her family actually bought this ticket? This is some scam and you're all falling for it." Gasps rippled across the rows. Lorraine's eyes widened in fury. "You have no idea who you're talking about. And even if she wasn't the daughter of..." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter who she is. She has the ticket, end of story." Amani swallowed, staring straight at Gerald. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. She just said, "You know you're wrong." The simplicity of her words made a few people clap softly, almost like an instinctive response. Gerald turned scarlet. "Oh, so now you're clapping for a kid." Pathetic. Kimberly's radio crackled. She whispered quickly into it, then looked at Gerald. "One more time, sir. If you refuse to comply, we'll have to remove you from the aircraft." Gerald slammed his newspaper shut, the sound echoing through the cabin. "Go ahead. Let's see." You try the murmurs turn to full-blown conversations. A man muttered. "We're never leaving on time," a young woman said under her breath. "They should have dragged him out already." Lorraine placed a hand on Amani's shoulder, whispering softly, "Stay calm, baby girl. Don't let him see he's getting to you." Amani nodded, standing tall. Despite her small frame, her silence screamed louder than any tantrum ever could. The flight attendant stepped back, waiting for the captain to arrive. Passengers leaned into the aisle, whispering, recording, watching everyone new. Now this wasn't just a disagreement over a seat. It had become a standoff, and the whole cabin was caught in it. But what none of them realized was that the standoff would drag in more voices. And soon everyone on that plane would have to choose where they stood. The cabin felt like a classroom where the teacher had stepped out Everyone buzzing, whispering, watching the tension grow without anyone fully stepping in the air. Vents hissed faintly overhead, but no one could ignore the scene unfolding in row 3. Gerald still clung to the seat like a stubborn child, arms folded, jaw tight. Amani stayed in the aisle with Lorraine's hand resting gently on her shoulder. She wasn't crying, wasn't shouting, just standing there, her little fingers gripping the strap of her backpack. Her calmness unsettled more people than if she'd thrown a tantrum. Passengers leaned toward each other. A college-aged guy in a grey hoodie whispered to the woman next to him, "Man, this is wild." They showed him the ticket and everything. The woman shook her head. "It's not just about the ticket. Look how he's looking at her like she doesn't belong here." 2 rows back, an older couple spoke in low voices. The wife murmured, "Why don't they just throw him out already?" Her husband sighed, "Because they don't want the headlines." Imagine the story plane grounded because of a seat argument. The whispers weren't private anymore. They layered over each other like background music. Everyone talking, but no one brave enough to stand in the aisle with Amani. Lorraine noticed it. She raised her voice, just enough so nearby passengers could hear you. "All see what's happening. He's taking her seat. Are you really going to sit there and pretend it's not happening?" A few heads turned away quickly, guilty looks flashing across faces. Nobody wanted to be the one to step into a confrontation from the back of first class. A man in a navy blazer finally spoke up. "The flight attendants need to handle this. That's their job, yeah." Another voice chimed in. "But they're dragging their feet." Kimberly stood, stiff arms at her sides, her professional mask cracking around the edges. She looked like she wanted to fix it, but didn't want the situation to spiral into chaos. Derek, standing behind her, kept his eyes on Gerald, jaw set. Gerald, fueled by the fact that nobody was physically removing him, raised his voice. "You see, nobody's making me move because they know I'm right. This seat's wasted on a kid." A murmur of disapproval swept across the rows. A woman with braided hair shook her head. "What's wasted is all of our time because you can't follow the rules." Gerald shot her a glare. "Mind your own seat." Amani's soft voice cut through again. "I just want to sit down." That single sentence hung in the air, quieting the whispers for a moment. There was something about the innocence in her tone that shamed the adults who had been too afraid to speak louder. A man in his 30s leaned into the aisle and said firmly, "Kids, right? Let her sit." Another passenger followed. "Yeah, this is ridiculous." Still, Gerald stayed, planted his knuckles, whitened as he gripped the armrest. He was sweating now, beads glistening on his forehead, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Lorraine sighed, leaning down to whisper in Amani's ear, "You're doing amazing. Don't let him see." "You're tired?" Amani nodded, clutching her boarding pass tighter. Her eyes, though young, held a seriousness that made even some of the passengers uneasy. She wasn't looking away behind them in row 5. A teenager whispered to his mum, "Why is he picking on a kid that's messed up?" His mum whispered back, "Because people like him think they can get away with it." The cabin became a chorus of quiet conversations. Each side of the aisle split between frustration, disbelief, and fear of getting involved. Some people pulled out their phones, others tried to bury themselves in magazines or screens, pretending it wasn't happening. Lorraine straightened her shoulders and turned to Kimberly. "You see, everyone knows he's wrong. If you don't handle this, you're letting him humiliate her in front of the whole cabin." Kimberly hesitated, then nodded faintly. "We've already contacted the captain." Gerald smirked, twisting her words. "See, even the captain has to deal with this. Just for me, that should tell you who's in charge here." Passengers groaned. The college student muttered loudly, "You're not in charge of anything, man. You're just stubborn." But Gerald didn't hear him or pretended not to. He leaned further back into the seat, eyes closing for a second, like he was settling in for a long battle. Amani's voice, barely above a whisper, reached him. "You know you're stealing." He opened his eyes, startled, then scoffed. "Stealing, don't be dramatic." But her words echoed in the cabin. A 10-year-old had said what everyone was thinking, and it made Gerald squirm. But before anyone could push him further, the heavy footsteps of the captain were already making their way down the aisle, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The sound of polished shoes against the cabin floor made heads turn. Captain Russell Hargrove, a tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, appeared in the aisle. His presence carried authority. People instinctively sat straighter, whispering stopped, and even Gerald shifted slightly, though he tried to look unfazed. Captain Hargrove's voice was calm but heavy with expectation. "What's going on here?" Kimberly stepped forward quickly, holding Gerald's boarding stub like it was evidence in a trial. "Captain passenger in seat. 3A refuses to move. His assigned seat is 8C. This little girl's seat has been taken." The captain looked at Gerald, then down at Amani, his brow furrowed when he saw her boarding pass gripped tightly in her hands. "Sir, is this true?" Gerald didn't flinch. "No mistake here, Captain. I paid for this ticket. First class is mine." Captain Hargrove extended his hand. "Let me see your ticket," reluctantly. Gerald handed it over again. The captain studied it for all of 2 seconds before lifting his eyes. 8C, this isn't your seat." "You know that." Gerald puffed out his chest. "The system's wrong. I'm not moving for some kid who doesn't even belong here." The captain's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Sir, this plane does not leave the ground until everyone is seated where they're assigned. If you refuse to comply, you'll be escorted off." Gasps fluttered through the cabin. Passengers looked from the captain to Gerald, sensing this was the breaking point. Gerald laughed dryly, shaking his head. "You think I'm scared of being escorted off? I've flown more miles than you've piloted, Captain. You're not tossing me out because of her." He pointed at Amani with a jab of his finger. Amani didn't flinch. She just stared at his hand, then back at his face. Her small voice, steady, "That's my seat. I'm not leaving the cabin," went quiet. Her calm, unshaken tone made Gerald look smaller. Even though he filled the seat, Lorraine placed a hand on her shoulder, proudly. "She's right, Captain. She shouldn't have to beg for what she already paid for." The captain nodded slowly, agreeing, but he didn't move. Gerald right away. Instead, he pulled Kimberly and Derek to the side, their hushed voices carrying just enough to be overheard by the rows nearby. Kimberly whispered, "If we drag him out, someone's going to film it. That video hits the internet, and suddenly we're the ones in trouble." Derek shook his head. "If we don't, people are going to say we let a grown man bully a child." The captain rubbed his forehead either way. "We risk bad press. We're stuck." Passengers started whispering again, catching pieces of the conversation. A man in row 4 muttered loudly, "They care more about headlines than doing the right thing." A woman behind him added, "Exactly what kind of example is this?" for the kid Lorraine overheard, and raised her voice just enough to carry you here. "That captain, everyone sees it. What message are you sending her? That grown men can steal from children and face no consequences?" The captain glanced at Amani, who was still standing there quietly, her hands never letting go of her pass. Her face wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of someone much older. He lowered his voice, but everyone could feel the shift. "We can't let this continue." Gerald barked a laugh, as if mocking the decision. "Oh, come on. You're really going to throw me off for a 10-year-old. She'll forget about this by the time she lands. Amani finally spoke again, looking right at him. I'll remember because you tried to make me feel small. But I'm not. The words landed harder than any adult could have thrown at him. A ripple of murmurs spread. Someone whispered, "Wow," another voice said softly. "That kid's braver than all of us." Gerald's smirk faltered. For the first time, his knee bounced nervously, betraying the arrogance he still tried to project. Captain Hargrove straightened his shoulders. Decision made, Mr. Whitford, last chance. Take your assigned seat or be escorted off this aircraft. The cabin held its breath. Everyone was waiting for the outcome, their phones angled discreetly, ready to catch what came next. Gerald leaned back, his voice louder, now desperate to regain control. "You wouldn't dare. You need me out of the way. Then go ahead. Shut this whole plane down." The captain's silence said everything. Kimberly's radio crackled with the voice of ground staff, waiting on standby. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. Some were annoyed at the delay, others furious at the injustice. But all of them knew this wasn't just about one seat anymore, but just when it seemed the crew might finally act. Amani herself took a small step forward, shifting the balance of the moment in a way no one expected. The entire cabin felt like it had gone. Still, phones were half raised. Passengers leaned into the aisle, and the captain's words still lingered in the air. But then Amani stepped forward. Her lavender hoodie seemed almost too big for her tiny frame, but her voice carried a strength that didn't match her size. She held her boarding pass close to her chest and looked straight at Gerald. "You're wrong, and everyone here knows it. My seat says 3A, not 8C. You're sitting in the wrong place, and you don't care because you think I can't do anything about it. But I can. I can stand here. And I won't leave." The words came out, clear, steady, and somehow heavier than if an adult had shouted them. A murmur rippled through the cabin. People shifted in their seats, surprised that a 10-year-old had found the courage most of them hadn't. Gerald forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Look at her trying to lecture me, like she's a grown-up sweetheart. You're just a kid. Kids don't make the rules." Amani didn't blink. She tilted her head slightly. But grown UPS are supposed to follow them. That landed. Several passengers clapped softly, the sound quickly building until it filled the front rows. Gerald's face flushed crimson. He turned sharply toward the captain. "You're really going to let a child tell you how to run your plane?" Captain Hargrove raised an eyebrow, but didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told Gerald everything. Lorraine's voice trembled with pride as she crouched beside Amani. "Sweetheart, you don't have to say more." But Amani shook her head. "She wasn't done when I grow up. I don't want people to treat me different because I'm smaller, or because I'm a kid, or because I look different. I want people to treat me the way they'd want to be treated." That's all her words. Simple but piercing. Hung in the air, no one moved. Even the passengers who had been pretending to scroll through their phones looked up now. Ashamed of their silence, from the middle rows, a voice finally called out. "She's right," another added. "Yeah, man, get out of her seat already." Gerald shifted in his chair, gripping the armrests tightly. He tried to regain control. "You people don't get it. I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just asking for some respect." Derek, the younger flight attendant, spoke for the first time with real firmness. "Respect goes both ways, sir. Right now you're not giving any." Kimberly crossed her arms, nodding slightly. "She's shown more respect in the last 10 minutes than you have. This whole flight." Gerald's mouth opened, but no comeback came. He was trapped not just by the crew or the captain, but by the truth of what a little girl had said. Amani clutched her backpack strap, turning slightly toward Lorraine. "I don't care if we're late. I'm not giving up my seat." Lorraine squeezed her shoulder, whispering, "And you won't, I promise." The cabin filled with whispers again, but they were different now. Passengers weren't just gossiping, they were voicing their support out loud. Kids braver than all of us. She shouldn't have to fight like this. This is embarrassing for the airline. And for him, Gerald huffed, tugging at his shirt collar. He looked at the captain, then at the crew, then back at the passengers who were now clearly against him. His bluster wasn't enough anymore, but his pride still held him glued to the seat. Captain Hargrove finally broke the silence. "Mr. Whitford, this young lady has shown more maturity than you. If you don't move to 8C, I will call security to escort you off. That is not negotiable." Gerald glared at him. "You'd really ruin this flight for everybody, over one seat," before the captain could respond. Amani spoke again, her tone sharper now. "No, you're ruining it. Not me. Not them, you." The cabin erupted in claps and murmurs of agreement. For a moment, Gerald looked cornered, his arrogance deflating under the weight of a child's words and the eyes of an entire plane. But instead of standing, he tightened his grip on the armrests. His knuckles white, his pride refused to let go. But the crew knew stalling any longer would put the entire flight at risk, and the decision about what to do next was no longer a question. It was a demand. The pressure inside the cabin was almost physical. Now passengers leaned into the aisle, waiting to see if the captain would follow through. Gerald sat stubbornly in 3A, but the cracks in his confidence were visible. Sweat trickled down his temple, and his breathing grew heavier. Captain Hargrove spoke into his radio, his voice low but firm. "We need ground security at gate B14. Passenger refusing to comply. The cabin erupted in whispers. People craned their necks, some excited, others anxious. A man near the back muttered about time. Gerald barked out a laugh, though it sounded shaky. "You're calling security for me over her." He jabbed his finger again toward Amani, who stood still her, boarding pass pressed to her chest. The captain didn't flinch. "Yes, sir. For you." Amani's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't back down. She whispered to Lorraine. "Does this mean he's leaving?" Lorraine crouched down beside her, brushing a hand across her braids. "It means he doesn't get to win, just because he's loud?" Derek stepped closer to Gerald, his voice steady, "Sir. For your own sake, I suggest you move before security arrives." Gerald shook his head, his pride refusing to bend. "No, you want me out. You'll have to drag me. Let everyone film it. Let the whole world see." Passengers murmured again. Some lifted their phones higher, eager to capture the moment. A woman whispered, "He actually wants to be dragged out." "He's lost it." Kimberly tried one last attempt. "Mr. Whitford, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about the other passengers." Gerald's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I'm thinking about them. I'm standing up for them. Nobody wants to admit it. But first class is for people who earned. It's not for little girls playing princess." The words hit the cabin like a slap. Gasps, groans, and even a few angry shouts filled the air. Lorraine rose to her full height, her voice sharp. "How dare you? She has every right to be here, more right than you. Considering your seat is back in row 8. Amani's eyes didn't waver. She said softly, "You don't get to decide who belongs. You're not the boss here." Gerald leaned forward, his face twisted in frustration. "You think you're tough? Huh, you're just a kid," before Amani could respond. The aisle behind them shifted. 2 uniformed security officers entered the cabin, their expressions neutral but serious. The sight of them caused Gerald to stiffen, though he tried to keep his composure. One officer spoke firmly. Sir, you've been asked multiple times to comply. You are not seated in your assigned place. You need to come with us." Gerald's bravado cracked his voice, rose louder than before. "This is harassment. I'm not leaving. I paid for this flight. You can't treat me like a criminal." The officer's tone didn't change. "We can and we will. Either move now or we will remove you, passengers," whispered some cheering under their breath. The college student muttered finally. Gerald looked around, searching for support, but found only glares and shaking heads. The passengers weren't on his side anymore, if they ever had been. He turned to Amani, his face twisted with frustration. "You happy now you're ruining everything?" Amani's small voice cut back, steady and calm. "I didn't ruin anything. You did." The words silenced him for a moment. Even the officers paused as if impressed by her clarity. Lorraine stood tall, her arm protectively around Amani. "It's over, Gerald. Stop embarrassing yourself." But Gerald's pride wouldn't let go. He shoved his arm against the seat back, anchoring himself. "I'm not moving." The officers exchanged a look, then stepped forward. The passengers leaned into the aisle, some holding their breath, others holding up their phones. The first officer said firmly, "Sir, final warning." Gerald's face turned beet red. "Then, do it drag me out. Show everyone how this airline treats paying customers." The officers moved in, each grabbing an arm. Gerald flailed his protests, echoing through the cabin, but his bulk couldn't stop trained hands. Passengers gasped. Some shouted, others clapped. Amani watched quietly, her grip on Lorraine's hand, tight but her eyes unblinking. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. She just watched as justice finally arrived, not through anger, but through patience and truth. But while Gerald was being hauled out, nobody expected the fallout that came next. The plane itself wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. The cabin buzzed with energy as Gerald was hauled down the aisle, still kicking and shouting. His voice echoed, even as the security officers pushed him through the jet bridge. "This isn't over, you'll hear from my lawyer." "All of you are sheep." The door closed behind him, and for the first time since boarding, the cabin exhaled. Passengers clapped, some louder than others. Woman across the aisle said, "About time." The college kid in the hoodie chuckled. "I can't wait to see that video online." Lorraine bent down to Amani's level. "It's over, sweetheart, you did it." Amani shook her head, softly, no. He did it to himself. Her words struck Lorraine in the chest, almost making her tear up. This wasn't just a child, parroting what she heard at home. This was Amani, processing, standing taller than anyone expected. Kimberly cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly." But she didn't sound convinced. Derek walked back up the aisle, muttering to her quietly. "Ops just called they're grounding us until they review the situation." Kimberly's face fell. "You're serious?" He nodded. "Policy. They don't want to risk taking off until they file a report." The announcement hadn't been made yet, but words spread quickly. A man groaned loudly. "You mean after all that? We're not even leaving." Another passenger muttered figures. "Always the innocent ones who pay the price." Amani overheard and tugged on Lorraine's sleeve. "Are people mad at me now?" Lorraine crouched, looking her in the eyes. "No, honey, they're mad at him. You just wanted your seat." But before Lorraine could say more, the captain returned to the cabin, his voice carrying authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you this flight is being delayed for the time being for safety and documentation purposes. We cannot depart until ground security clears us. I understand your frustration, but this is out of my hands." Groans filled the cabin. Some passengers cursed under their breath. Others sighed heavily, pulling out phones to rebook connections. The unity they had felt moments earlier quickly fractured into self-interest. A man in business attire muttered loudly, all this because of one spoiled kid in first class. The words cut sharp. Lorraine spun around. "Excuse me," she had every right to that seat. The man shrugged, unfazed, maybe. But now the rest of us are paying the... Price could have let it go. Amani heard it too. She turned in her seat, her voice soft but piercing. "So you think it's okay for him to steal, because it's easier for everyone else?" The man's lips parted, but no words came out. Other passengers looked at him with disapproval until he shifted uncomfortably and faced forward. That's when a woman sitting near the front spoke up, her tone thoughtful. "Do you all even know who she is?" Heads turned. Lorraine stiffened. She didn't want attention drawn to Amani's family, but the woman continued, "That's Amani Barrett. Her dad is Darnell. Barrett, the billionaire who built Barrett Tech. He's donated millions to schools and hospitals across Texas. That's his daughter." The reaction was instant. Whispers raced through the cabin. "Wait, really? Barrett Tech?" I saw him on Forbes Gerald's earlier words. "She doesn't belong here," sounded even more absurd now. Amani shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the sudden recognition. She whispered to Lorraine. "I didn't want them to know." Lorraine rubbed her shoulder gently. "It doesn't matter if they know you earned respect long before they learned your last name." Still, the mood in the cabin shifted again. Some passengers who had been indifferent or annoyed now looked at Amani with admiration or guilt for not standing up sooner. The college student broke the silence with a grin. "So a billionaire's kid had to teach us all what fairness looks like." That's something a woman across the aisle added. "Doesn't matter whose kid she is." She was right from the start. That man was wrong. Amani looked down at her backpack. "I don't want them to treat me different, just because of who my dad is." Lorraine smiled softly. "And that's exactly why you're special, sweetheart." Meanwhile, Derek whispered to Kimberly, "Ground ops still won't clear us. They say the altercation has to be fully logged before we leave." Kimberly sighed, glancing at Amani. One man's pride just cost a whole plane full of people hours of their lives. But as the minutes ticked by and frustration spread, the story of what had just happened began to grow larger than the delay itself, and soon passengers realized they had all been part of something they'd never forget. The announcement hit like turbulence. No one was ready for the flight, was officially grounded until further notice. The captain's voice echoed through the speakers. "We appreciate your patience, sir, but safety and protocol require us to remain at the gate while we finalize documentation with airport security." The groans came instantly. A man in a suit slammed his laptop shut. "Unbelievable! I've got a meeting in Phoenix I'm missing because of this circus." A mother juggling a toddler muttered, "Try explaining this to a 2-year-old." Phones lit up as people rushed to rebook or complain online. A chorus of sighs, curses, and mutters filled the cabin. The sense of unity that briefly stood behind Amani was splintering into irritation. Lorraine pulled Amani close her arm, wrapped protectively around the girl's shoulders. She whispered, "Don't let them get to you. This isn't your fault." But Amani had already noticed the sideways glances, passengers tapping away at phones, whispering, some even throwing quick looks her way. Like she was the cause, her little hands twisted the strap of her backpack. "They're mad at me now, come," she said quietly. Lorraine tilted her chin so their eyes met. "No, baby. They're mad because they got inconvenienced, but you didn't cause this." "Gerald did. Don't you carry his mistake still?" The murmur of frustration continued around them. A man in row 5 leaned into the aisle, his voice sharp. She should have just sat somewhere else. We'd be in the air by now. Another passenger shot back instantly. Oh, so it's her job to move when a grown man steals her seat. That's what you're saying. The first man shrugged. I'm saying I care more about getting home than teaching a kid a life lesson. Amani turned in her seat, her small voice cutting through the argument. It's not a lesson, it's what's fair. If I moved, then he would have won, and then next time he'd do it again to someone else. Silence followed. Even those frustrated had to acknowledge the truth in her words. Lorraine squeezed her hand proudly. Kimberly made her way down the aisle, trying to soothe passengers. We understand your frustration. Please know we're doing everything possible to resolve this quickly, a man muttered. Talk faster. Others, though, started to speak louder in defense of Amani. The college kid near row 6 raised his voice so everyone could hear. This little girl had more guts than all of us. If she can stand up for what's right, we can wait an hour. A few passengers clapped. Not everyone joined in, but the atmosphere softened slightly. The tension began shifting from frustration at Amani to frustration at Gerald, even though he was already gone. Lorraine leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. See, sweetheart, the truth always comes out, even if people fight it. At first, Amani nodded, but her brows furrowed. Why do people get mad at the wrong person? First, Lorraine thought about it, then answered gently, because blaming someone is easier than facing the truth, but the truth always wins if you stand tall. Meanwhile, Derek whispered with Kimberly near the galley. Ops says this delay could be over 2 hours. They've got to file an official report because security had to step in. Kimberly shook her head. All this over one man's ego. Passengers overheard, groaning again. 2 hours, are you kidding me? Amani caught the complaints, her small shoulders sinking. Lorraine leaned close again. Don't you feel guilty? You showed courage. That's something these people will remember, long after they forget the delay from the back of first class. A woman stood and spoke, loudly, addressing the cabin. We shouldn't be blaming this little girl for the delay. We should be asking why it took so long for the airline to act. She was right from the start. The reaction was mixed. Some nodded, others rolled their eyes, but the conversation had shifted. It wasn't just about Gerald anymore. It was about fairness, about courage, and about how easy it is for people to stay silent until someone else stands up. Amani listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the window she'd finally claimed. Outside, the sun hit the tarmac, bouncing heat waves into the air. She whispered almost to herself. I just wanted to sit and look outside. Lorraine hugged her gently. And you will don't let anyone steal that joy from you. The flight might have been grounded, but something more important had already taken off inside that cabin, a reminder to every passenger that silence helps the wrong side. And courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands quietly in the aisle, refusing to move. But while the plane sat motionless at the gate, the story of what had just happened was already leaving the cabin, spreading to phones, social media, and soon the whole world. By the time the flight attendants announced they were still waiting on clearance, the mood in the cabin had shifted again. People were restless. But the fire of the argument had dimmed phones, buzzed with notifications as passengers uploaded clips to social media. Whispered conversations turned into half-joking remarks about viral fame. The truth was, everyone knew they had just witnessed something that would live beyond this flight. Lorraine brushed her hand through Amani's braids. The little girl sat back in her seat, at last gazing out the window. Her boarding pass was still in her lap, as if she didn't want to let go of it, until the wheels actually left the ground. You handled that better than most grown UPS would have, Lorraine whispered. Imani turned her head, her eyes thoughtful. I didn't want to. I just wanted to sit. But he made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be here. Lorraine's voice softened. That's exactly why it was important. You stood your ground. Sometimes people will test you, not because you're wrong, but because they want to see if you'll give up. And you didn't. Imani nodded slowly, then looked back toward the aisle where Gerald had sat. Do you think he's still mad? Lorraine chuckled under her breath. Probably, but his anger doesn't change the truth. He was wrong, and everybody knows it. Now, a woman across the aisle leaned over Sweetheart. You were brave. Don't ever let someone take from you what's yours, people like him. They thrive when others stay quiet. Imani gave a small, polite smile. She was shy about the attention, but her eyes brightened at the kind words. Not everyone was so gentle, though the businessman in row 5 sighed heavily. Brave or not, we're still stuck here. Some of us have lives to get back. To Lorraine's head snapped in his direction, but Imani tugged her sleeve before she could respond. The little girl spoke for herself. You're mad because we're late. But if I gave up my seat, you'd still be mad. People like him don't stop when they get their way. They just take more. Would you want that to happen to you? The man blinked, caught off guard. He didn't answer. The cabin fell into a hush, and for the second time that day, Imani's words carried farther than any adult's argument could. The college kid grinned, breaking the silence. She's smarter than half the professors. I know that got a few chuckles, lightening the mood. The captain reappeared, addressing the cabin. We've been given clearance to depart in the next 30 minutes. Thank you for your patience. I know this wasn't the flight you expected. Passengers clapped lightly. Relief replaced some of the frustration. The tension finally began to lift as the crew prepared again for departure. Lorraine leaned close to Imani. Remember this moment, baby. Not because it was hard, but because you stood tall. The world won't always be fair. People will test you, doubt you, even steal from you. But if you know your worth, you'll never let them win. Imani whispered almost like a promise to herself, I won't. The engines hummed to life, the cabin vibrating gently. Passengers shifted in their seats, buckling belts, tucking away phones outside the runway, stretched long and waiting. The incident might have delayed the flight, but it had left something behind too. A reminder that respect isn't about size, age, or status. It's about treating people the way you'd want to be treated. Some passengers would tell the story as an inconvenience. Others would share it as a headline. But a few, those who had really listened, would remember the courage of a 10-year-old girl who stood her ground without shouting, who reminded them that fairness doesn't ask for permission. It demands to be honored. As the plane taxied forward, Lorraine squeezed Imani's hand. You did good. Imani looked back at her with a small smile. I just wanted my seat. And maybe that was the lesson, all along. Sometimes justice isn't about winning a fight. Sometimes it's about refusing to shrink, even when the world tries to push you back. This story reminds us that silence in the face of wrong only helps the wrong side. Courage doesn't always roar. It can stand quietly, holding its ground, refusing to be moved. If this story moved, you take it with you. Speak up when you see unfairness. Teach the next generation to stand tall, no matter their size or age. And remember, true respect is never given to those who steal it. It belongs to those who earn it.